let me introduce to you all our this morning's guest. So Justin Jones, Jonesy as we call him, is an extreme adventurer. Constantly pushing the boundaries of human endurance, he has undertaken a number of large-scale expeditions over the past 14 years. Two in particular have captured global acclaim and attention. On the 26th of Jan 2012, he and longtime friend James Casterson made history by completing the longest unsupported polar expedition of all time. In 100 years of polar exploration, no one had ever walked from the edge of Antarctica to the South Pole and back without assistance. After 89 grueling days, they made it back to the coast after having skied 2,275 kilometres with everything they needed to survive in the harshest environment on Earth. This expedition was named Crossing the Ice. 4 years earlier, he crossed the ditch again with Cass and paddling 3,318 kilometres without assistance across the Tasman Sea for another world first. They braved 10-metre swells, howling winds, endured severe food and sleep deprivation, and adverse winds and currents. They became the first kayakers to cross the Tasman Sea, as well as becoming the longest transoceanic double kayak expedition. So the boys have had some amazing adventures, and here to chat and talk all things adventure is Pete and Jonesy. So I'm going to throw it over to you.
Hey Jonesy, how you going this morning?
Yeah, fantastic. I've got to say, I'm just watching you paddle, and it's hypnotic. I could watch this all day.
Yeah, well, mate, let me tell you, you've done some remarkable expeditions and adventures, and this one matches it. You know, I've been riding this bloody spin bike for 26 days, and it feels like I've ridden to the poles and back myself. So I'm hearing you and feeling what you've done.
Oh, I reckon you probably don't get off, do you, all day? You've been like this for the last how many days now, just perpetually cycling?
1st of June, mate, I started. Every now and again, I get off and have a shower and get back on the bike.
Oh, mate, those legs, Lance Armstrong, look out.
That's what it feels like. And I'm going to go straight to what I see as your biggest challenge, the biggest better. And you've got a truckload of them, and we'll cover a couple of them today. But you're a world-renowned adventurer, incredible explorer, and discoverer. So I'm going to go straight to the biggest one.
All right, which one's that one?
How did you survive COVID being locked up?
I actually think the adventures that I've been on have actually really helped with COVID, because COVID has been really interesting. I know a lot of people probably use this analogy, but like we are all on an adventure right now, because I have this definition that adventure is an activity with an unknown outcome. And Right now we're all in the unknown. It's so uncertain. And yes, Australia is not seeing, I suppose, the negatives, the really dark face of COVID with all the deaths that we're seeing over in the US and Brazil, but there's so much unknown. And you know, all the negativity aside, there's a side of me that's actually quite excited about the whole COVID period of time, because it's an opportunity for the world to grow and come together. I mean, it really is. We're all in this storm together. We're weathering it differently. We're all in different ships, but it's for the first time we are actually, in my lifetime, in my history, we're all going through something as a collective family, a global family. How am I navigating it? Yeah, tough. Yeah, been stuck in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bondi with 2 young kids. It's making me yearn for a bit of space. So I'm about to sort of come up and take over the farm at some point in time. So watch out.
Hence why I see it as the biggest challenge that you've done, mate. The rest of the things, you're in a bit of your own control. There were some lovely metaphors and segues about riding your own way and riding your own wave and surviving the storms. And that takes me straight to 2008. Now, you and Kaz decide that you're going to paddle from Foster to New Plymouth. It takes 3 years of planning. You occupy the garage of, was it Kaz's parents?
Yeah, we took over that garage for a good 2 years, and we weren't very popular by the end of it.
Tell us about the, the planning stage. It says, 3 years, but was it that you come together for a few tins and pizza once a week at the beginning, or was there real serious work, or did that really ramp up, months out or so forth? What was the planning stage like?
Look, obviously, as you get closer and closer to the point where we were going to depart, it's going to get more insane. I think there was a stage, maybe for the last year leading into it, where I was on average probably sleeping about 4 or 5 hours a night on top of all the training, the preparation, the sponsorship fundraising, the gear testing. And I think every weekend, because we had to do a huge paddle every weekend, we used to do Palm Beach to Manly and back, so 52 kilometers every Sunday. But we also had to kind of live our normal lives. So I remember working a job in a bar and I basically didn't sleep the entire weekend because I go straight from working to paddling. And that was kind of interesting. But yeah, no, it was a 3.5 year stretch of our lives to lead up to that trip. And the first year and a half was less intense on the physical side. It was more intense on the mental side. We were trying to work out whether this trip was possible. And that took a year and a half to come up with a 100-page document, which is our blueprint to how we're safely going to do this expedition. And I'll tell you what, when you're designing entirely new systems to put into a kayak, to get across an ocean like that safely, that planning stage is the hardest. It really is. And then trying to convince people you're not mad and you need to raise the funding for it. That was tough.
And did you decide on the adventure first and then find the route, or was it that you found the route and then when, like it was very clear that the idea that was kicked around was that you'd paddle from Australia, New Zealand. Was that where it started?
Yeah, the idea was actually born on another expedition. So I'm a big believer in that you go off on one trip and you get in a headspace where you're away from the city, you're away from work, you're away from regular life, and it gives you the time and space to think about other journeys you want to do. And so generally that's what's always happened. I've always had a done trip, had another idea on that trip, and then pursued it. And so we were paddling down, Cass, myself, and another friend from school when we were 18 years old. We were paddling down the entire length of the Murray River. And it was an idea that popped up on that journey. And at the time, like Cass mentioned it, and I was like, you're an idiot. Like, you can't get a kayak across the Tasman Sea safely. You just can't do it. And so I shut it down. And then we revisited the idea 2.5 years later. And I started shutting it down again. And I kind of realized that I was being my own worst enemy here. I was saying no to something and I didn't know whether it was possible or not. And I was like, well, actually, I've got to pull back. I've got to say, look, I'll do the research and see whether it's possible. And then if it is, that's when we commit to it. So you got to have the dream and the idea, but then you've got to be able to, I suppose, prove that on paper that you can actually do it and it is safe, because you go out there and do a lot of things, but you might not come back from them if you don't plan it.
Mate, we had a mate of mine, Cam Mostyn, join us early in the series, and he not long ago, as in months, finished it was a 4-man paddle they rowed across the Atlantic Ocean in the Whiskey Talisker Atlantic Ocean race, and they were out there 4,600 kilometres, 4 of them alternating in the boat, paddling. They were always in the boat, of course. Can you give just those that are listening insight into the difference between what they would have done with a 4-man rowboat and what you fellas took across the Tasman?
Yeah, definitely. So the biggest difference between rowing and kayaking is that you're utilizing bigger muscle groups when you're rowing. You're able to get those legs into it for that drive, and plus you're going backwards. So that's orientation wise. With a kayak, you're using a single blade, a double paddle blade, but it's mobile. It's not locked into oars or anything like that. So those guys there, I'm assuming they would have done, depending on they probably would have done a 3-hour rotation. So 2 people rowing, 2-hour rotation. Yeah, there's a 2-hour rotation. So that changes a little bit. If you're a solo rower, some people do 12-12 and some people do 3-3 or some people do 6-6. But being a 4-man crew, they've got that ability to go faster. So 2-2. 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and that's a nightmare if you're trying to sleep and rest. Like it's a grueling, punishing trip. I've done some things like that where you're on and off, on and off. Those guys would have had a cabin on either end of the boat, probably storage. It would have been fairly long, probably about 8 meters long. Their rowboat. Our kayak was actually longer than that. It was about 9 meters long, but a lot narrower. And we're skimming the water. Our hands are touching the water, so we're much lower to the water. We took an approach like they did. We built a cabin onto the back of the kayak to be able to shelter away from the storms, because that was number one priority, was to come back from this trip alive. And not having a safe space to sleep, that trip's not going to happen otherwise.
Yeah,
but a super trip they did. I'm jealous.
One of the other things is, whilst there's yours is totally unsupported, there's, in a very large degree was too, but they're part of an organised race. There is safety. It might be a day or two away, but there's things around. You guys are just out on your own, aren't you?
Yeah, no, we were on our own, so there's no boats or vessels around that. It's not an organised race. We organised everything, and they're very different oceans as well. I mean, the Tasman Sea is a sea, but they're very different stretches of water, because like the Atlantic, the swell's not as nasty than the Tasman Sea. So I had a lot of friends that have gone, a handful of friends that have done the Atlantic and then have come across to do the Tasman in a rowboat, and they've struggled, and they've one guy failed three odd times. And the reason is the amplitude, the sharpness of the waves, it's all different. It's a nastier bit of water. And the vessels you take across there are built for the Atlantic, not for the Tasman. Sorry, Pete, I've gone off the boil talking about sort of like waves and stuff like that. What was the original question?
No, you're cool, mate. It was just around the differences and so forth, and that the fact that you were unsupported, you're out there on your own. You've answered that. Let's have a look at, you leave from Foster on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and that's to pick up the currents. Is that right?
It is, to pick up the current. So the EAC roars down the coast of Australia, and for everyone that's listening, the EAC is the East Australia Coast Current, same current as in Finding Nemo, that Nemo's dad gets into. And what it does is it roars down the coast of Australia and then pushes out what's called the Tasman Front. Now, the Tasman Front will get you into the centre of the ocean fairly quick. And the reason why we left from Foster was look at the coastline of Australia, it kind of cuts away below Foster. And it was the closest point to the EAC, only 30 kilometres distance, versus if you left from Newcastle, it's 90 kilometres, 120 from Sydney, and there's a lot of counter eddies and currents at that point. Now, what I might do, Pete, if you don't mind, is you were asking about the kayak, I might just actually show a quick picture.
Please do, mate.
I've got the ability to do that. So I'm going to switch over to this cam here. That's the kayak. So everyone can now see it. It's sort of like 9 meters long with this little cabin built onto the back of it.
Yeah.
And for everyone's sake, I will throw up actually a image of the route that we took across the Tasman Sea. Now that's us getting to New Zealand, but have a look at that.
Yeah.
There's this big circle in the middle of the Tasman, and that's what we kind of did in this loop. So we left from Foster, roared across. Day 19, we're halfway across, and then at that point we had a little bit of a kerfuffle and did a 2-week circle in the middle of the ocean, which was not ideal, but it took us 62 days to get across in total. Yeah,
there's obviously so many learnings, and a big part of what you do now when you're not taking on incredible explorations and adventures is share those learnings with corporates, part of keynote speaking, and which is just an outstanding thing to see. But it's also in other programs, and there's obviously lots of learnings, and you can hear in your language how you translate what you did, what you learned, and bring that into relatable topics. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about this morning, though, was what did you learn and the importance of redundancy and building systems into that?
Speaking my language here, Yeah, no, it's hyper important. So if you like, and correct me on the statistics, I'll do a little bit of statistics, early in the morning. It's going to be fun. Um,
Yeah.
but redundancy is one of the most important things ever. Like for a trip like this, if we were to go with this train of thought, if we were to assume with the kayak trip alone that there was only 10 things that could go wrong on that trip, but those 10 things would cause a serious failure, it would basically end the expedition. What would you say is an acceptable safety parameter on those 10 things happening? What's a percentage of those things not happening? You say it's like 10% chance of those events happening, 5%, 1%, 0.5%. What's your general take on that?
Yeah, well, I guess it's depending upon which system you're talking about and the risk of it. And I would have thought it was much higher, though.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're talking about stats and stuff like that, a lot of people go, you know what, there's a 5%, because Australians are gamblers, they're like,
Yeah.
there's only a 5% chance, like 1 in 20 chance of those things going wrong. That's fair odds. But if you look at, if there's 10 events that could actually happen, 10 things on that kayak,
Yeah.
chance of one of those things coming off and going wrong it pushes that percentage in chance up to closer to 50%.
Yeah.
Something will go wrong. You add a level of redundancy to it, to every single one of those 10 events, add a level of redundancy to it, and it pushes it down to about 3%. Do it again, and it drops it down to like 0.5%. So
Yeah.
redundancy is so powerful, so important. And we had equipment breakdown along the way. We had, our water desalinator broke on day 13, and that was pumping all our salt water to fresh water. So, if we didn't have a backup system, we would have done right then and there because we couldn't take enough water. So we had a manual pump. And that meant we actually had to pump a manual pump for 3 hours a day. Wasn't fun, but it got us across the Tasman Sea. And if that one broke, then we actually could go back to the electrical desalinator, reconfigure it, and turn it to a manual pump as well. So try to have 2, if not 3 levels of safety for the most important things. Like, you've got to have redundancy.
There's a risk in business that we overcomplicate things, that we build self-imposed policies, procedures, and systems, and sometimes we just take away the creativity, the innovation. We take away the people's ability to make decisions and be leaders because of the amount of policy and procedure. But what you're talking about here is there's got to be a balance, hasn't there, between risk, acceptable risk, redundancy, systems and so forth, and there's things you can compromise on around, you can't take everything because of weight and so forth, but, how much of your time in the lead up did you spend in deciding and testing, what could you take, what you had to take, what would be nice to take, and what you just had to leave at home?
Yeah, it's a super question, and it's it shows a lot of thought behind it. One of the things that really informed us with what's the key most important things to actually have to achieve before this trip, to fix, to get ready, because you can if you want to plan a trip like this, you can be planning it for the rest of your life and still not get to the start line if you want everything to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
So creating a risk matrix of the probability of everything happening. So like, you list down all the possible events that could happen, from, rudder breaking, kayak, something happened to the kayak, to one of us getting injured. Also really dark things as well. You have to think about, what if a family member dies back at home? Do you want to actually hear about that? Come up with this huge list of things, come up with all the answers to it, and then you put into a risk matrix where you map out the probability of those events happening and the severity of. So obviously, hull rupture, very severe, and so you got to work out where it sits on the probability chance. And everything that's, down the darker end, the high probability or high consequence, you've got to take care of. You can almost draw a line across that chart and go, everything on that side is stuff that we have to take care of because it's mission critical. And it's some advice that I actually gave to a friend of mine who rowed across in that same row race, the Talisker Whiskey Challenge across the Atlantic. She rowed it just this past year. And she said...
What's her name, mate?
Michelle Lee. She's awesome.
Okay. Yep.
She's a ball of energy.
Yeah.
I actually just interviewed her for a video podcast last week. But she came to me and she was like, Jonesy, I'm battling, I'm struggling. There's so much stuff to get done before this trip. can you give me a little bit of advice on how you guys approach it with your journeys? And I said, write 2 lists. Have 2 to-do lists, basically. One to-do list is all the things you need to do. If you do not do, you will die, or your journey will be extremely rough. And the other list is the things that's going to make things nice and fun. You know, it's going to make your journey more enjoyable. Focus on that, the list of things you need to do, and basically throw away the other list. Because you can always be playing around that space trying to get those things done, and you won't finish it. You will not finish. You go out on a sea trial, you come back with 100 other things to do. So obviously you pick some things to do from that list because you want to have your iPod, obviously, and those nice fun things. But yeah, that was, and she was like, that was the best advice I got, because I was, paralysis she was going through at the moment at that time.
Hey mate, can you take us back to the photo of you and Kaz in the kayak? And you know, when Cam showed us the photos, it was obviously there was a lot more real estate under their feet and around them. You look at that, and an obvious question, one for me, is how do you move between the seats? You know, what kind of process? Obviously, it's something that you did thousands of times and you nailed, but you look at that and you go, geez, how do you do this? And particularly when you've got, 10-metre high swells and so forth.
Yeah. So the number one thing was like, there was only a couple of occasions where we actually had to be out in the pits paddling or taking care of stuff in those really big seas. Number one thing is, like, before it gets to that point, to be sheltered inside that cabin, you know, with a series drogue or a parachute anchor out to help protect us.
Right.
Now, but the thing is, like, I'm in the back seat there, Cass is in the front. So, and that was the way we always stayed, because that's the way we'd always trained. Used to taking my timing off him. And plus also Cass for his mental headspace. I mean, I don't think he could deal with staring at the back of someone else's head. And so from my position, what I'd do is I'd lean forward, unclip the door behind me, lean forward so the door could swing open. Then I'd plant my hands and then get up on my knees and then get the feet into the door and go in backwards. And then Cass would be able to crawl over the deck back into the kayak. But it meant generally we had to go, if I went in, I was locked in the tight end, and then Cass would come in, and that we just followed that process. Yeah. I think only on a couple of occasions when we were cabin bound did I have to actually get past Cass, and it's fairly tight in that cabin. And this is going to sound a bit odd for a Wednesday morning, a bit early in the morning. We were nude the whole time inside the cabin.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, going past Cass, crawling over the top of him was a little bit too intimate for my liking at times. But it is a rude awakening for him sometimes when I have to get outside to go to the toilet.
Yeah, fair enough. It was interesting, again, talking to Cam. He talked about the need for body maintenance. And, you know, and I don't know what it was like for you, but for him, it was about shaving down and making sure that he always looked his best, because that's the type of bloke that he was and he is. It was all about appearances, just in case they got stranded and someone came across him. He had to be looking his best at all times. Mate, I want to take you to the equipment list, and I want to get your thoughts on some of the things here and some of my observations of, around what you took. There was a tracking beacon, which is quite obvious why. There was a sat phone, the icebreaker, merino wool, nice product placement there too, Kaz, I thought. But what I found really interesting was the fact that you had 3 car batteries with you. Now, my question, Jonesy, is were you expecting to come across a couple of broken down cars on the trip? Why the hell have you got 3 car batteries in your boat?
Yeah, we had 3 sort of deep cycle batteries down the bottom, and there was a couple of reasons why. One of the reasons why we didn't mind having so much weight was because we could use it as ballast. It would help sort of keep the kayak there. We wanted a heavy sort of bottom line so that we could actually read write. And it was always going to be mounted in place, so we knew that weight was there and bankable. So it was about 75 kilos worth of batteries in the end. Why? I suppose the approach we took with our trip. So the tracking beacon required power. The transponder that we had out there, the desalinator, was a huge draw on energy, and so that's most of the reason why. And the reason why we had 3 battery systems, 3 independent battery systems. We could switch between them. So you're running one, so you don't never run down the entire battery set right down. So we have one, would draw it down to a certain point, like 11.7 volts or whatever, and then we'd switch over to the next one, allow that one to charge up from the solar panels, and then we always had one kind of in reserve. So it's a bit of redundancy there, but then the electrical desalinator shut itself on day 13, and we had oodles of power after that. So we had more than enough power to power our iPods at that point.
Okay, so the thought that you were seeking sponsorship from NRMA and was going to do some service on cars broken down, that wasn't why the batteries were there.
That would have been a great idea, actually. It would have been a beautiful little clip to have made, and pull up to a boat having some engine trouble, and then we're like, oh, we can jumpstart you.
I'll be there in about 12 days. Stay there. Hey, mate, I look at the intended duration when you did the planning was 2,200 kilometres. And are we talking nautical kilometres here, nautical knots, or are we talking actual kilometres?
Talking straight kilometres there. So
okay. All right.
For some reason, like on that trip, we stuck with kilometres, even though we should have been doing nautical miles.
Okay. So we've gone 2,200 was the plan. You did 3,318. Jones, I'll revert back to that equipment list, and I ask you, upon reflection, you think you should have taken a compass with you?
Oh, mate, we knew we were doing the wrong thing. We just couldn't stop it. The currents out there are merciless. So we did a 2-week circle, getting caught and swept up into a 2-week whirlpool in the center of the ocean. And we couldn't break free of it. So there was a week straight where we were trying to paddle against this current and making no progress. And the only reason, I'll pull it back up, the only reason we're able to actually get free of that current pattern is because we decided to paddle actually 150 kilometers back towards Australia. Yeah. And I want to make a little quick point at this point just about teamwork. Yeah. Cass and I were the 2 blokes paddling out there each and every day, but we had a huge supportive team behind us, like massive. This team spanned 17 different countries. But when we came up with this plan and idea, I remember us speaking to our land team based in Sydney saying, guys, take some time, make sure this is the right course of action. We think we should paddle backwards to go forwards to use the winds and the currents to our advantage. Make sure it's the right course of action. And our land team based in Sydney spoke to the CSIRO. The CSIRO in turn engaged NASA, got real-time satellite imagery and then analyzed it for us, and then sent back to us via satellite phone the coordinates and like the maps of where the currents were and where we were in relation to that, so we can make informed decisions with real-time data about when and how to try and break free this current pattern. And that's one of the sole reasons why we got out of that circle, which was pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's amazing, mate. I'm not sure if you're aware, I actually worked with NASA.
Oh, really? No, I didn't know that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, he's a Lebanese mate of mine who's got a concreting business. Mate, tell me, awesome. Tell me how was your headspace as you're going round and round in circles? Was there a point there where, how did you survive that mental challenge where you're not making progress and then you're actually going backwards to eventually go forwards?
I was pretty dark in that circle. And look, there's a lot more. I suppose if you want to talk about some of the fights and biffs we had out there, that was the time for it, because it's more a reflection on, not that you hate the other person, it's more a reflection on the situation you're going through. And that's what you got to remember, I suppose, with this COVID thing that we're all going through. We're all under a lot of stress, a lot of challenge, things aren't going right. You got to be gentle and kind, one to yourself and the people around you and your teams. You really, really do. And understand that if people have a bad day, it's not a reflection on them. It's a reflection on the situation, really. So the people deal with stress in different ways. So we had some good fights out there over some pretty mundane things. Like I think I was trying to be upbeat about the circle we were doing one morning on the Tasman, and Cass didn't take kindly to it. So we used to start our day off with a Snickers bar, half a Snickers bar each. And he was like, "Oh, we're not doing too badly, are we?" And then he threw my half of the Snickers bar into the water. Oh, and it was on. That day was a horrid day, but it was a reflection on the fact that we were going to circle. Yeah. yeah, the circle was an interesting period of time. It was dark. I mean, when you're stuck in that cabin, 10-meter waves outside you. So whoever's, watching this right now, riding their bikes, have a look up and imagine a wave that's 5 times higher than that ceiling above you.
Yeah.
It's dark, and I'm actually claustrophobic. So being stuck in that cabin for one stretch was a 4-day stretch. Cass gets chronically seasick. It was brutal. It was brutal.
Yeah. Hey, I'm imagining when you're talking about these fights or tiffs or brouhahas, whatever we call them, that you're sitting in the back of the kayak, and as you do in the position of power, you're bringing your blade forward and just splashing him. Is that what a tiff looks like?
Look, we've never resorted to physical blows, surprisingly, on our trips. I think, so it's more, there was a bit of water splashing at one stage. There's just like a lot of mudslinging, and I think you try to inflict emotional damage on the other person, but that's because you ultimately you need the other person, so you can't get into a situation where you're holding massive grudges on a trip. You don't have that luxury. So the dealing with conflict on these trips, I've generally take a rule of thumb, and it has changed. I mean, the last expedition I did with my wife didn't take this approach, trust me. But with Cass, it was complete disclosure. So if you've got an issue and a problem with the other person, complete disclosure. But there's some parameters and rules about how you disclose information. And one thing we had was hold on to that, whatever your gripe is, for a significant period of time. Don't just blurt it out as soon as you have it, or if it's bubbling away. Think about it for 12 hours. And when you're alone or in your mind, say it aloud to yourself. Because more often than not, when you're saying it out loud in an argument, often it's the first time you're saying it out loud, and you realize as it's coming out of your mouth, that it's a reflection on you, not the other person. And yet, because of ego, you don't back down. You're like, well, I'll double down on it, and you keep on going forward.
Yeah.
If you're alone and you say that to yourself, you realize it's about you, and you can reframe it and really work out what the problem is. So that's powerful.
That's so cool, mate. There's so much advice there, and I can see why you do so much work with businesses and corporates and organisations, because the lessons that come from what you've done, it's just about all of the contextual issues we face in managing teams and so forth.
100%.
Talking about teams, you spoke about the importance of your team back in shore. The name of the bloke who was providing your sailing advice and ocean strategy, who was that?
Oh, we had a couple. So do you know who? There was Roger.
Yeah, there was Roger. Draw your attention, Jonesy, to the bloke that is listed on your website, Terry Wise.
Terry, yeah.
Now, I need to ask, is this a piss take? You've got a bloke by the name of Terry Wise who's providing sailing advice and ocean strategy.
Maybe he's actually changed his name to Terry Wise from something else. Maybe, I mean, it's pretty good. Old wise man of the sea. That's pretty bloody good, don't you think? Terry's awesome. Terry taught us how to, be comfortable on the water, and was out there for a lot of sea trials for us. But he had a huge supportive team. And one thing we did as well, just talking about naysayers for a second, we had a lot of negativity in the lead up to the Tasman in particular. A lot of negativity. And naysayers are always going to be there. You're always going to have trolls in real life. And the thing is about how you listen to them. So I use trolls and naysayers as a form of motivation, which is great. But for most people, sometimes that can be a little bit, too close to the skin. So, maybe don't listen to them. But there's a little bit of a rule. There's the naysayers that have no knowledge whatsoever about what you're undertaking. And so using the kayak trip, for example, they're not sailors, they're not rowers, they're not kayakers, meteorologists. Know nothing about your trip. They just want to pull you down. Don't listen to them. But then there's the people who do have knowledge, the sailors, ocean rowers. And Terry was one of them initially. He's had a lot of concerns about our trip. And then those are the people you want as part of your team. You want to work with those guys, bring them on board so they become advocates for you. And then you can utilize their advice and allay their suspicions and fears on certain topics. And if you can do that with them, brilliant. That's what you want. That's how you draw that team of world-class specialists to you.
Mate, there's a couple of questions I want to finish up on this epic adventure. You arrive in New Plymouth. in New Zealand. That's your landing point.
Yep.
Mate, was there anyone from New Zealand Customs there asking if you had any fruit with you?
So yeah, New Zealand Customs did come by, and
Of course they did.
yeah. So we were coming in, and from 5 days out,
Yeah.
it was on the sat phone. It was like, guys, when you get off the kayak, remember to bring your passports out because customs is going to be there. Customs is going to be there. And like, right, okay. And so we brought our passports. We didn't have shoes or wallets, but we had our passports. But so we arrived in New Zealand, and I want to show you this photo. When we came into Namutu Beach in New Plymouth, we jumped off that kayak and we were greeted by this crowd. Hold on, that's the first side of land. This crowd here. It's crazy. Like if you can see there,
25,000 people, Jonesy.
Yeah, 25,000 people were down
Half
there.
the New Zealand population turned out.
Well, the mayor of that area was like, well, our region's only got 45,000. There's about 25,000 each. That's pretty impressive. Now, we had this amazing arrival. So we plumb forgot, as soon as we jumped off that kayak, plumb forgot our passports.
Yeah.
So we get stagger up between this crowd of people, get to this stage they've set up there, and these two custom officials pop out of nowhere and they're like, where's your passports? And we're like, back on the kayak. And they were really cool about it. They were like, oh, all right, guys, fellas, you got a lot going on. We'll come see you tomorrow. Just don't run off on us.
So they didn't form a queue and make you join a queue just to simulate the arrival into an international airport?
No, that would have been kind of funny, actually. Or if they rejected us and they said, no, not taking boat people, go back. That would have been Australia's approach.
And in your planning, was there any redundancy for if they didn't let you in?
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest failings that I do when I plan is I don't plan beyond the finish.
Yeah.
Because it's hard enough to plan the trip. And so I've had a couple of trips where I've gotten to the end point and not known what's going to happen afterwards. New Zealand, for one, didn't have shoes, didn't have a wallet, just arrived there and we're like, I don't even know how we're getting home. The paddled across Bass Strait, that was another one, and got to the other side. It was like, how are we getting picked up from here? So yeah, it's been a bit interesting.
Mate, you talk about Bass Strait and it leads me, you'd obviously be aware of the Sydney to Hobart.
Mm.
Yeah, and not sure if you're aware, I'm a bit of an adventurer myself. I've completed the Sydney to Hobart crossing 5 times.
Serious? I didn't know that. Wow, that's fantastic. Like, it's on my to-do list of things to do, Sydney to Hobart.
Yeah, mine were all by Qantas, but I still did it, mate.
I can't trust anything you say. I keep on forgetting that.
Mate, there's so much more I want to talk to you about, and it almost feels wrong to skip across a couple of them, but I will get there just to get a few key points out of the crossing you did with Kaz across the Antarctic to the South Pole and back. And what we'll do is we'll post your links up on our website so that people can explore all of this content and videos. And there's so much good content on your website, Jonesy, that it'd be wrong to not give some of these conversations the true length of time. But I want to talk to you before we just have a few questions about that. Is these epic adventures that you take on, they are epic and they're world records for a reason because of the size and that. But we got people taking on this bike ride at the moment. We've got people riding this hill on the road in front of us that will keep them awake at night. For some of us, the adventures that we sign up for are equal to the challenges that you've faced for different reasons in their own self. How do you help them? What do your words of support and encouragement and advice around when they're sitting with that conversation in their head that says, I can't do it, I want to do it? Well, how do you help them?
It's an interesting one because I'm a firm believer. Well, first, I love a point that you touch on to start with, and that's I'm a firm believer that adventure is relative. It's relative to the person that's going through the experience, and no one can tell you what your adventure is going to be. So that the adventure is, as I said before, an activity with an unknown outcome. That can be on an expedition across the Tasman Sea, down in Antarctica, walking across the outback with your family, or it can be in business, it can be in the dramatic arts, it can be on a trip like this, like a ride across Thailand, it can be that sort of thing. So no one can tell you what your adventure is. So what you're doing is personal to you. Now, the hard times, there are always going to be hard times in life. And the thing is, it's reframing it. Really reframe what hard times are. So a lot of people look at them as negative things to be shied away from, whereas I think you should lean in, because it's only when you have discomfort, only when you have challenge do you actually grow. And you can't grow without it. If you go through life and you're never challenged at all, then you're going to stay in stasis at this point, and you're going to be happy because you're never going to need to learn to grow. So challenge is a great thing. Challenge is something that should be looked forward to. Yeah, and do it in doses, do it in bite-sized chunks. So, in the lead up to a trip like this, when you're on a long cycle trip, it's about sort of those micro doses of challenge along the way, going off and doing a hard hill session, X amount of months out from a trip like this is so critically important, because it gives you that little bit of that breathing room to grow. I have this idea that we call them getting ugly training sessions. And getting ugly training sessions were basically like weekend long training sessions where we try to make it as hard as possible. And one of the best ones I think I've ever experienced was when we went up to the Walgett, up near actually where your farm is. So we're up in the Old Punt Road, down that way, Wallamai Creek. Jumped in basically a canyon and creek for 2 days straight in the middle of winter, and just trundled, swam, walked through it, and froze half to death on it deliberately, because it pushes you to some dark places, and there's going to be an exit point, there's going to be a finish line, and when you get to that finish, the sense of accomplishment is fantastic. So realizing that these hard times will pass, this shall pass, and to lean into it.
And you talk about that growth comes from places where you're uncomfortable and challenge and so forth.
Yeah.
Is one of your kids?
Sorry, that's a kid in the background. I'm just going to shut the door.
I was going to say, bring him in. Bring him in, mate.
I don't know what's going on out there. I've actually hidden myself away. I was running a bit late to get to the little office space that I've got, so I'm actually hiding in my daughter's room.
Back in the cabin of the boat. Mate, you talk about that growth that comes from adversity, and we've got one of the ladies that's riding with us from Melbourne, Mary, from the Doing Good Rewards ride, and she rode with us last year, 500k ride in 5 days, and it was something that she'd never done before, never had anything like that. Didn't have long cycling legs before she arrived, and there are plenty of people, including herself, who really doubted her ability to do it. But Mary's on the call this morning, I know that, and it was through that adversity and the support of those around her that she's of a lady of years. Let's say she has some wisdom in her years on this planet, so she's not entirely in her 30s, she's on the other side of that. But the challenge and growth that she took from undertaking her own adventure, her own adversity, she speaks about it in such glowing terms of challenge and then growth.
It's if I could just tell a very quick story. One of the biggest lessons I've learned from adventure actually came on this most recent trip. So I did a walk, actually walking from the centre of Australia down towards Port Augusta, 1,800 kilometres with my wife and 15-month-old daughter. So we walked for 102 days out there. And one of the biggest lessons I learned was actually from my daughter. And talking about growth, it's very poignant. In the outback, it's not soft and fluffy. There's a lot of big thorns, sharp thorns. And our daughter started to walk 2 weeks before, first steps 2 weeks before this trip. So she learned to walk in the outback, and she'd step on these thorns. They'd go into her feet. She'd cry, she'd scream. And for the first 3 weeks of that trip, I thought, I'm a terrible dad. I've ruined my daughter. She's going to be emotionally scarred from this. What have I done? And it was interesting to see that beyond that point, the screams and cries started tailing off and getting quieter and quieter until there was a point halfway through the trip, even maybe a bit beforehand, she'd step on these thorns. They go into her feet. She wouldn't cry. She'd just lift up her foot and go, ooh, prick. You flick it out, and she'd keep running. Like, kids are so much more resilient and adaptable and strong than we actually can really ever realize. And that's the same for adults. We forget that. You know, there's this concept of what normal is. And I think normal is not something to be leaned into. Normal is something to be challenged. You know, normal, the status quo, keeping up with the Joneses isn't something we should strive for. It's more we should strive for basically our own path, you know, forging the path for our own life, because we only have one life, so we might as well live it. And there's something about kids, they don't see that status quo. They don't see normal. Normal is just what they're doing each and every day when they show up. So there's something really powerful there. We are so much stronger, more resilient than we actually realize.
Absolutely, mate. Some of the most pleasurable moments on these rides in Thailand is seeing, you know, people have these challenges and face adversity, and then with that comes the real growth. There's a reflection of your most important job as a dad.
Yeah.
Who's the new one, Jonesy?
This is Morgan right here. So Morgan, did you walk across the outback? Yep. She did that when she was 15 months old. She's now 4, and she's eating crackers with her mouth open. Close your mouth a little bit more, Moo.
Morgan, do you join Dad on stage and deliver keynotes?
She actually has a couple of times. Where I've.
Put your feet up when she's there, Jonesy?
What's that?
You put your feet up. Is there a feet increase?
No. It's much harder. Generally, she jumps in my arms, and I'm holding her for half the keynote. But so I've done some crackers where she's run up on stage. I've stashed some lollies. My wife and I do some keynoting together. Stash some lollies somewhere to give to her later. She's found the bag, smashed the bag of lollies, and come running out on stage just high on sugar. Okay.
You can control your destiny from Foster to New Plymouth, but you can't control the kids, mate. So it's been a remarkable chat, and you know, we didn't even touch on some of the big adventures, but as I said, I just didn't want to skip over to say that we covered them all, because I think there's so much depth and learning to pull each of them apart in their own right. And as I said, we'll share the links so that people can have a look. It is described as a gloriously ordinary bloke, and I think that's true, and it's a real compliment that you might be a gloriously ordinary bloke just doing extraordinary things. And you make us proud to be Australians when we see people like you and Kaz and your family doing what you do. It ignites the spirit of adventure in all of us. So thanks for joining us, mate. It's been a wonderful chat. And I'll hand back to CT to wrap this up.
Pete, thank you so much. Really appreciated it. Thank you.
Awesome. What an amazing story. And as Pete said, we didn't even get stuck into half of it. But we've been chatting with Jonesy, and he's keen to come on the Future of Leadership journey. So there's an opportunity to hear some stories there. And he's recently just launched, if you're loving these chats, and I know that there's a few on this call who love the adventure and love some of the guests that we've had on this show, not show, but the ride. So Jonesy's just launched Adventure Live, which is a video podcast series dedicated to these kinds of stories. So have I got that right, Jonesy?
Adventure Thinking Live. No, it's almost there. Adventure Thinking Live. Yeah.
Almost there. So we'll post the link to that in the Facebook group. Highly recommend jumping on, because again, there's just some great chats. And yeah, just tapping into the minds of some of these amazing adventurers. So we will share that. So thanks, Jonesy, for joining us this morning. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, Pete, for coming on as well. And for those of you riding, we are almost at the end. Don't forget to log your Ks. I think we're all in the process of doing that now, so you don't need that reminder, but just jump on and get that done. And if you want to grab the recording from today, just jump onto our YouTube channel and you can revisit today's chat or any of our other conversations. So until tomorrow, have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you again for joining us this morning. Bye.
Have a great day.
Swadee Cup.